3 of 2 Blue Vortexes come out, and I've already done a breakdown of everything that happened in the chapter, which means now it's time to dive into theories. And there are a ton of theories that are bursting out of the seams of Chapter 3. Boruto might have a planetary level attack. He might have gone back in time to train with Itachi to learn how to use the realm of drunken dreams. Boruto might be a Toad Sage, Sasuke might be hanging out in Mount Myoboku, and Kashin Koji is more likely than not Boruto's new teacher. And while I would love to sit here and go over every single one of these theories in this one video, today we're gonna have to take a small bite of the big chunk. Which is why today we're gonna talk about the most important reveal to come out of Chapter 3 to Blue Vortex. And that important reveal is Boruto has toads. Let me say that again, because I don't think you're grasping how truly insane that is. Boruto has toads. The boy who, up until Chapter 80 of Boruto proper, never showed any interest in either Mount Myoboku, being a sage senjutsu, or the toads at all. Yes, that same Boruto now has toads. Toads that he's working with to infiltrate Code's hideout. And while the idea of Boruto having a couple of toads that he talks to in premise to somebody who doesn't understand the Naruto universe doesn't sound all that crazy, the possible implications of Boruto having connections to toads of any sort are wild. Boruto being connected to the toads can really mean one of three things. Either Boruto trained with Kashin Koji and is currently coexisting with him as a teacher, or Boruto and Sasuke went to Mount Myoboku, which is presumably unaffected by Ada's brainwashing, and now Boruto has a working relationship with the toads very similar to that of his father's relationship with the toads. Or the third and final option is that Kashin Koji is tied to Mount Myoboku, and Boruto not only trained at Mount Myoboku, but also with Kashin Koji. Now I know what a lot of you are saying. Isn't Kashin Koji connected to Mount Myoboku? I mean, he's a toad sage. He has toads. Well, we actually don't know that for certain. In fact, there's actually some evidence that might prove that Kashin Koji isn't connected to Mount Myoboku, which is why we have 3 individual theories. But what's even wilder than the fact that we have 3 individual theories all spreading off the fact that Boruto has a couple of toads in his jacket is the implications of what these individual theories might do to the future of Boruto's plot. Because if we believe that Boruto and Sasuke possibly made it to Mount Myoboku, that might mean that Sasuke is alive. But if we believe that Boruto got linked up with Kashin Koji, it could mean that either Kashin Koji or Sasuke died in order to save the other. And so many other possible things. There are so many possibilities to speculate about. We really need to get started. But before we get started, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And if you like the idea of me speculating about your favorite anime and manga, guys, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime. Or if you just like the idea of me talking about anime in general, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Or if you want to look like somebody who will talk to somebody about anime, guys, go ahead and check out my brand new anime merch store, where you can pick up some of the greatest anime sweatshirts, t-shirts, and sticker packs known to man. But before we get into all that, guys, today we gotta talk about a brand new sponsor to the page, Dungeon Hunter 6. Dungeon Hunter 6 is the latest addition to the Dungeon Hunter franchise, a long and storied franchise that started its releases in 2009. And we are now welcoming a new installment to this incredibly renowned series. And let me tell you, this installment is the best yet. Dungeon Hunter 6 is a free-to-play mobile APRG with a unique hero collecting system all set in a beautiful fantasy world. The gameplay features fast-paced hack-and-slash combat that allows you to customize using different builds and heroes in order to take down big bosses in any way that suits you. And this game is 100% free to play. You can download it using the link in my description or by scanning the QR code on the screen right now. But why, outside of the game being free, should you download this game today? Well, in Dungeon Hunter 6, killing the boss is not the end. See, in Dungeon Hunter, not only can you defeat a boss, but you can also loot a boss, or ride a boss, or even summon a boss, up to 3 of them, to assist you in combat later on in the story. That's right, bosses you defeat can become members of your squad. They follow you, perform perfect combos with you. You can even morph into them in the late game. And with over 100 bosses for you to defeat, your squad can look incredibly unique to you. But Dungeon Hunter's creativity doesn't end there. Dungeon Hunter gives you the ability to play the game your way by giving you the options to complete missions in objectively creative ways, like a stealth mission which can be completed by turning into a cat. And outside of gameplay mechanics, Dungeon Hunter also allows you to have an incredibly customizable mount experience, allowing you to ride numerous different fantasy creatures or mechanisms when meeting other players. Not to mention that Dungeon Hunter 6 is the best looking Dungeon Hunter yet, with highly optimized 3D graphics that make combat smooth and gorgeous to look at. And outside of all of that, there's also guilds you can join and guild raids you can go on, a variety of skill trees that you can grind to make your character uniquely you, and an auction house in which you can trade with other players to get the equipment that you need. Download the game today on Android or iOS using the link in my description or by scanning the QR code on the screen right now. And if you do either of those things, you'll get a starting pack worth $50 with 10 summoning scrolls, 1 SSR Lieutenant, Demonic Wolf, and 1 accessory pack. You can also use your game account to enter the Lucky Spin event, which can get you prizes like an iPhone 15 Pro Max, a PS5, an Apple Watch, and this event starts on October 13th. Check my description for details. So what are you guys waiting for? It's time to make the bosses work for us. So toads, not really a big deal unless you're in the Naruto universe, and then they're a really big deal. Toads have played a massive part in Naruto's story ever since they were introduced through the medium of Jiraiya, who introduced gigantic toads like Gamabunta and smaller toads like Gamakichi, introduced sage areas like Mount Myoboku where the toads live and train. And then as Naruto's story progressed further and further on, we were introduced to more massive toads, and we got to learn more of the toad's history. We got to learn about the great toad sage who dreams the future, who also trained with Hagoromo to make him the first toad sage. Toads have played an integral role in the history of humans so long as the Naruto universe has existed. However, their role felt much less integral in Boruto. See, because a large amount of Naruto's power did revolve around the toads. Prior to Naruto awakening KCM1 or KCM2, his strongest mode was his Sage mode. And through the loss of Kurama, he's once again resumed this position. Pretty much the only connection that the first 80 chapters of Boruto had to the toads whatsoever was Naruto saying that he's become a better toad sage now after the loss of Kurama, saying that during his Hokage-ship, he's taken more time to master the true art of Sage mode. But that's basically it. In all the big battles in Boruto, Naruto never summoned any of the toads. Whether it was battling against Kinshiki, Momoshiki, Ishiki, Jigen, the toads never came into play. Pretty much the only person we ever saw use toads in any meaningful capacity was Kashin Koji, Jiraiya's clone. And while Kashin Koji obviously has a very important battle against Jigen and Ishiki, he's definitely a side character. He has way less screen time than Jiraiya ever had. But it appears as though that there's a possibility that not only toads, but also that side character Kashin Koji might be getting more screen time in Boruto's second part. But that's just one of 3 very distinct possibilities that could explain how Boruto ended with a couple of rivets and a couple of croaks in his cloak. So we've already gone over the 3 possibilities that could explain how Boruto would end up with the toads. Either he came into contact with Kashin Koji during the time skip, or he went to Mount Myoboku, or Kashin Koji and Mount Myoboku are intertwined. Now, while the last option might seem as though it's the most obvious if you don't watch a lot of my videos, I'm actually gonna say it's probably the least likely. And because it's the least likely, it's gonna be the first one that we cover. See, it seems like relatively common knowledge that if Kashin Koji is a toad sage, nonetheless a perfect toad sage, and is able to summon toads, that he must have ties to Mount Myoboku. That just makes sense. Everything we know about becoming a toad sage or finding toads comes from Mount Myoboku. Not until you hang out with Ma and Pa and get covered in toad oil and get whacked by a stick and learn how to pull in Senjutsu chakra while sitting on a giant spike do you get to become a toad sage. At least that's usually the situation. But we don't know for sure that that's the only way that one can become a toad sage. In fact, there's evidence in Boruto that you don't have to go to the sage area of a certain animal to become that kind of sage. How do we know this? Well, Mitsuki. Mitsuki is how we know this. And Mitsuki falls into a very similar categorization as Kashin Koji. See, Mitsuki is Orochimaru's clone, though not a straight up one-for-one cut. There's a bunch of other DNA from other sources, possibly Toneri, that made Mitsuki a clone of Orochimaru, but closer to a child of Orochimaru than anything. Now, Mitsuki isn't the first clone that Orochimaru tried to create. We've seen multiple times that there's dozens, if not hundreds of other Mitsukis. And while all of those other Mitsukis currently exist in big floating test tubes, and the only other Mitsuki that exists outside of test tubes is Log, Mitsuki is the ultimate of Orochimaru's clones because Mitsuki was able to accomplish exactly what Orochimaru was cloning himself to pull off. And that is, Mitsuki is a perfect snake sage, something that no other either iteration of Mitsuki was ever able to do. Now, while there is technically a possibility that Orochimaru just brought Mitsuki to the Great White Snake Sage and had the Great White Snake Sage bite Mitsuki on the neck while he was unconscious or off screen, we never see Mitsuki travel to Ryuchi Cave, which implies to us at least that Mitsuki never had to go to Ryuchi Cave and get bitten by the Great White Snake Sage to become a perfect Snake Sage, which means that Mitsuki technically stands as evidence that you may not need to go to a sage area to become a sage, so long as you are a clone of somebody who is a sage. Because Orochimaru, while they were never able to fully undergo the transformation to becoming a Snake Sage because their body wasn't strong enough, Orochimaru is an absolute genius at pulling in nature chakra and mixing it with their own to make Senjutsu chakra. And considering the fact that Kashin Koji was a clone of Jiraiya and Jiraiya is a Toad Sage, Kashin Koji fits very perfectly into the box of ways that one could figure out becoming a sage without going to a sage area. Okay then, Nick, where is he summoning these toads from then? A really good question, actually. See, obviously one would assume that Kashin Koji is summoning these toads from Mount Myoboku, as that's the only place that we've ever seen toads come from. However, that's not the only place that toads have to come from. Now, I'm not saying that there's some other area that you might be able to summon toads from, but what I am saying is that Kashin Koji might not actually be summoning toads. See, up until Kashin Koji's battle against Ishiki/Chikin, his toads operated in a way very similar to that of the toads from Mount Myoboku. He could summon big ones to crush things or to open their mouths so he could crawl in, and he could teleport away, or he could summon small ones to sneak into certain areas. However, it was in his battle against Jigen that something very conspicuous happened, and that is that one of his toads was shrunk by Jigen's Sukuna Hikona, which is the Wheel of Dharma dojutsu. You know, the yellow eye with the 8 black spokes. Now, the way that Sukuna Hikona works is that Jigen is able to use it on himself to make himself small. And if he wants to use it on anything that's not himself, it can't be alive. Otherwise, he could have just made Naruto and Sasuke really small and then stomped them into the ground like grapes. So how exactly was Jigen able to use this dojutsu on a toad, which is very much alive? Well, the easy answer is that it's not. See, it kind of stands to reason that if Amado was gonna make a perfect Toad Sage, he would probably also make some toads. Because what's a perfect Toad Sage without toads? And it wasn't like Kashin Koji was gonna go to Mount Myoboku to make some contracts. This is doubly corroborated by the fact that Amado was using one of Kashin Koji's toads to transmit a video image from the battle where Kashin Koji was battling against Jigen to Konoha, something that no toad from Mount Myoboku could do. And on top of this, we've seen Kashin Koji be able to summon toads to the Kara hideout, which exists in a different dimension from Earth. And we know for a fact that Mount Myoboku exists on Earth and therefore exists in Earth's dimension. And while Sasuke was able to summon Garuda to the lava dimension in the battle against Kaguya, thus proving that animal summons are able to travel between dimensions, that was only one time, and it might have been a plot hole. Because if animal summonings are able to travel between dimensions, that means that people can be reverse summoned between dimensions, which pretty much destroys all space-time ninjutsu's deadliness. So if we do look at Sasuke summoning Garuda to the lava dimension as a plot hole, that would imply that in order for Kashin Koji to summon toads to the Kara dimension, that those toads would have had to be in the Kara dimension already. And if Amado was the one who created them, which he probably was, then they would be.
But Nick, why are you so opposed to the idea of Kashin Koji having any connections to Mount Myoboku?
It's not that I am opposed to it, it's just that it's kind of unrealistic. You don't think Ma and Pa would have reached out to Naruto the second that a white-haired guy with the exact same chakra signature as Jiraiya happened to waltz in? There's also a fact that not a singular one of Kashin Koji's toads ever talks or identifies itself with a name. And if we know anything about the toads from Mount Myoboku, it's that they're rather talkative. So it makes the most sense to me that Kashin Koji has no affiliation to Mount Myoboku, which is why I believe that the third option, that Boruto went to Mount Myoboku and Kashin Koji was there cooling his heels in one of the toad oil pools, is the least likely, and why I believe that options 1 or 2 are substantially more likely. So let's talk about option 2 first, because we started at 3. We'll just work our way backwards. Option 2, which is that Boruto and Sasuke went to Mount Myoboku, actually makes a fair amount of sense. And it's a theory that I've had for a long time and have been very vocal about. See, here's the thing. Boruto and Sasuke escaping the grasp of Kawakian Code for 3 years was kind of unrealistic. Ignore Code, even though apparently he did appear to be the issue over the course of those 3 years. Kawaki is Ada, who has the Senrigan, which means that Ada is able to see and hear everything that happens on Earth always. Well, not always, but starting from when she was born. Which means that if hypothetically Kawaki wanted to find the location of Boruto and Sasuke, he could simply just ask Ada, and then she could just activate her Senrigan and be like, oh yeah, there they are. That was easy. So the idea of Boruto and Sasuke being on the run was kind of ridiculous to me. I mean, how do you see from somebody who's able to see everything and everywhere always? Well, there was a couple of theories, two to be exact. One is that you travel back in time, prior to when Ada was born. And since rather oddly the stipulation that her Senrigan ability started when she was born, and we know that Masashi Kishimoto does nothing on accident, it made sense to come to the conclusion that Ada's abilities cut off at the moment of her birth because at some point or another we were going to go back prior to Ada's birth. The other possibility is that Boruto and Sasuke were going to go to a sage area like Mount Myoboku or Ryuchi Cave, though Mount Myoboku would be the substantially safer of the two, as Ryuchi Cave is much easier to find than Mount Myoboku. And I've been pretty vocal about the fact that I believe that the Toads of Mount Myoboku will be involved in Boruto's life even after Ada's brainwashing, because at Mount Myoboku they have a thing known as the Memory Stone. See, the Memory Stone was introduced in a filler episode in the later half of Naruto Shippuden, where Hagoromo and Hamura are directed to it by the Great Toad Sage. See, the Memory Stone in Mount Myoboku tells the true history of the world. Basically, everything that happens on Earth is inscribed upon the Memory Stone. The reason that the Memory Stone is important in this filler episode is because Kaguya has used Infinite Tsukiyomi on the Earth prior to make everybody hail her as the Rabbit Princess, the ruler of humanity. Now, because the Toads had the Memory Stone, they were able to deduce that Kaguya was not a benevolent ruler, and the Great Toad Sage was conveying that knowledge to Hagoromo and Hamura, which is why Hagoromo and Hamura, at least according to this filler episode, went on to battle against Kaguya. And since I subscribe to the theory that if anime filler doesn't contradict the manga, that we should take that information, I believe that the Memory Stone would serve an incredibly vital role in Boruto's future, as regardless of whether or not Ada brainwashes the entire Earth, the Memory Stone would tell the true history of the Earth, and thus the Toads of Mount Myoboku would still be on Boruto's side. And in actuality, they would probably be compelled to help Naruto's son. And it's because of this compulsion that Boruto and Sasuke would be reverse summoned to Mount Myoboku. You see, because there's only two ways to get to Mount Myoboku, that is to either be reverse summoned or to take a secret path. And it's because of the existence of this secret path that we know that Mount Myoboku exists on Earth. However, regardless of how secret the path is, it won't be a secret anymore if Ada watches you take it. So the secret path wasn't an option. However, assuming that the Toads were able to read the Memory Stone and had a compulsion to try and save Boruto, they could send Toads out into the world to find Boruto and to make a contract with him so he can be reverse summoned back to Mount Myoboku. Easy as that. And if, and only if Boruto was able to be reverse summoned to Mount Myoboku, technically he would be safe there. Because remember, like I literally just said, there's only two ways to get there: to be summoned or to follow a secret path. Sure, while Ada Senrigan is able to see everything that's happened during the course of her lifetime, that doesn't necessarily tell her where to look. So maybe there's a possibility that Naruto took the secret path to Mount Myoboku during the course of Ada's lifetime, but she wouldn't know where to look. And it's not like she's gonna comb through the last 16 years of Naruto's life to find an entrance to a path. So since the location of the secret path would be hidden and Kawaki and Ada and Daemon have no ability to be reverse summoned to Mount Myoboku, that would mean that Boruto would kind of be safe there from both Ada, Daemon, and Kawaki, and also Code. Now, technically, running away from Ada Senrigan didn't appear to be the biggest issue for Boruto and Sasuke over the course of those 3 years, because we are now 3 chapters into Two Blue Vortex, and Ada and Kawaki haven't talked yet, and pretty much the only meaningful screen time that Ada has gotten thus far was Ada telling Sarada that she would undo Kawaki's wish if Sarada wanted, meaning that the chances that she's working collaboratively with Kawaki are pretty low. But on top of this, it's also pretty safe to assume that Boruto and possibly Sasuke didn't make it to Mount Myoboku until at least after a year into the time skip, because one of the things we've learned in the first 3 chapters of Two Blue Vortex is that 1 year into the time skip, that Code and Boruto had a scuffle that lost Code and Eye, in that Boruto just ran away from. Now, if Boruto and Sasuke had made it to Mount Myoboku day 1 into the time skip, Code wouldn't have found them, which means that if Boruto and Sasuke did end up in Mount Myoboku, that it didn't happen until after they fought Code, which would actually make a fair amount of sense, because Code was chasing after Boruto for the entirety of the first year of their time skip. However, after their battle, Code couldn't find Boruto, and eventually Code got sick of looking for Boruto and decided to invade Konoha, and that's what the first 3 chapters of Two Blue Vortex have been about. So the possibility of Boruto going to Mount Myoboku, a place where Code wouldn't be able to find him after their first scuffle, is pretty high. There's also the fact that Boruto's toads have the ability to talk. Though it's obviously not an impossibility that toads made by Amado have the ability to talk, we've just never seen any of Amado's toads talk. Now, it's not like they were holding complex conversations or even giving their names for that matter. They were simply reporting on the fact that Code had returned to his hideout and that they had seen the Ten Tails. However, outside of the fact that these toads talked, they acted in a way that actually made them more seem as though they were created by Amado, as these two toads weren't really combat toads. They were two small reconnaissance toads, with the ability to work as a kind of two-way radio. See, Boruto could talk to one of the toads, and that message would be conveyed to the other toad that he placed on Code. And when that toad that was placed on Code wanted to send a message to Boruto, it would just come out of the toad that Boruto had. Now, unless I'm completely forgetting something that happened in Naruto, I don't remember any toads from Myoboku operating in this capacity whatsoever. So what's the summation of this possibility? Boruto and Sasuke made a run for it at the beginning of the time skip, and for the first year of the time skip, they were trailed by Code. However, 1 year into the time skip, Code catches up with them, and thus Sasuke and Code have a scuffle that Boruto runs away from. Sasuke is either turned into a claw grime, dies, or just goes somewhere else over the course of this battle, and Boruto is now all alone. The toads, upon realizing that Boruto, Naruto's son, is out alone in a world that wants him dead, send out a toad to go get him and bring him back to Mount Myoboku, where he spends the next 2 years training. And when you consider the fact that Boruto, when he explained how Rasengan Uzuhiko worked in the first place, said that he used the chakra of the planet, which is kind of just like a fancy restaurant way of saying senjutsu, to make the Rasengan Uzuhiko, there's a possibility that we could tie the Rasengan Uzuhiko back to senjutsu and Mount Myoboku. And I think that is possible, but not as possible as the third option, or I guess the first option, which is that instead of the toad saving Boruto, that it was Kashin Koji who saved Boruto. Now, somewhat aggravatingly, narratively, this option makes more sense, but logically, it makes less. See, unfortunately, the Memory Stone does come from a filler episode, so using the Memory Stone as a way to build out a theory isn't exactly the most sturdy way. Well, I do think that there's a distinct possibility that the toads of Mount Myoboku weren't affected by Ada's brainwashing. Assuming that they have the Memory Stone, kind of a stretch. See, Kashin Koji was very clearly and purposely kept in the story. After Kashin Koji was grievously injured in his battle against Ishiki, he teleported away after climbing into the mouth of a toad. And considering the fact that up until that point, Kashin Koji had really just been a side character, keeping him alive implies that he had a role down the line. And you would hope that Kashin Koji, the literal clone of Jiraiya, would have a role down the line, because you don't bring Jiraiya back into the story through the medium of a clone and not have him meet Naruto, or at least Boruto for that matter. And if Kashin Koji were to come into Boruto's life during the time skip, well, narratively, that would make a lot of sense. I mean, what did Naruto do? For part 1 of his story, he was trained by a guy with 1 Sharingan, and then during the time skip, he went off to go train with a Toad Sage in the form of Jiraiya. Now, Boruto in part 1 of his story was trained by a guy who ended up with 1 Sharingan, and then during the time skip, according to this theory, would train with the Toad Sage, but through the medium of Kashin Koji. Both narratively and from a plot perspective, Boruto ending up with Kashin Koji just makes sense, until you start asking the question, why? See, of course I can sit here and say Kashin Koji's in the story, he has to end up with Boruto because that's what Naruto did. And maybe your average YouTuber would end the video there. But we can't just say, I want the story to be like this, and therefore it's gonna be like this. We have to ask the incredibly logical question, why would Kashin Koji team up with Boruto? Well, in order to understand that, we probably have to try a bit harder to understand Kashin Koji. So Kashin Koji is a clone of Jiraiya, and a cyborg, like Ada, Daemon, and Code. And so for as long as Kashin Koji existed, he believed that his sole purpose was to kill Ishiki. He and Amado were spies within Kara, and Kashin Koji's entire purpose in life was to destroy Kara by destroying Ishiki. However, it wasn't until Kashin Koji found himself face to face with Ishiki that he realized that that wasn't his purpose. See, Kashin Koji's purpose was to kill Jigen, but his purpose ended there, as Kashin Koji was also supposed to die in his battle against Ishiki. And it wasn't until he realized this that he realized that his entire life he had been a tool for Amado. See, Amado, who he trusted more than anybody else on Earth, as Amado trusted him with the incredibly arduous task of taking Ishiki out, threw him away like a toy he didn't want anymore. And it was at that moment of realization, as Kashin Koji was teleporting away from the battle against Ishiki, that he realized his entire life was a lie. But at that moment, what does Kashin Koji do? What becomes his objective in life? Is Amado now enemy number one? Does he now want to wipe out Kara by himself? Does he want to kill Code? Does he want to destroy Konoha? Well, I can't really say I know. However, I feel in that moment of total loss of self and identity that Kashin Koji accidentally unlocked some of Jiraiya's latent memories. Fond memories of spending long days with a blonde boy training to get stronger. And it's at that moment that Kashin Koji feels a compulsion to find this blonde boy. Now, Kashin Koji would obviously need time to recuperate after his battle against Ishiki. But I believe there's actually a lot more to that battle that happened 1 year into the time skip than we've previously stated up to this point. See, for a long time, and that time is about 3 months, we thought this battle happened between Sasuke, Code, and Boruto. There's another possibility now. See, much in the same capacity that Sasuke hasn't shown up in 2 Blue Vortex yet, neither is Kashin Koji. There's a possibility that the person who took out Code's eye wasn't Sasuke, but Kashin Koji, who managed to find this blonde boy prior to Code. However, unfortunately, I don't think narratively that really works. Like, yes, if you want to take a hit of the copium and say that Sasuke is still alive and well, then sure, absolutely, it was Kashin Koji who fought Code. However, keeping Kashin Koji alive so we could fight an off-screen battle against Code it doesn't sit right with me. I think in actuality, the most likely thing that could have happened from both a plot and narrative perspective is that Sasuke is the person who cuts Code's eye and probably either dies in the battle or turns into a claw grime or is somewhere else. And the baton of training Boruto is then passed from Sasuke to Kashin Koji, much in the same capacity as the baton was passed between Kakashi and Jiraiya. And thus, for the last 2 years of the time skip, Boruto was with Kashin Koji. And considering the fact that Kashin Koji was strong enough to take on a 10% Jigen and battle against Ishiki for a fair amount of time, and is a perfect Toad Sage, and therefore could teach Boruto all about how to use the chakra of the planet, I think this is probably the most likely outcome. And I think this theory will most likely be proven in Chapter 4, when Kashin Koji is shown to be the person who supplied Boruto with said toads. Now, as for why Kashin Koji wants to kill Code, well, Code is the last living vestige of Ishiki, and killing Ishiki was Kashin Koji's prime directive for his entire life. On top of this, Boruto came into Chapter 2 talking about the horrors of the Ten Tails, right? And a lot of people ask the very logical question, what does Boruto know about the horrors of the Ten Tails? Did he go back in time to see the horrors of the Ten Tails for himself in the 4th Great Shinobi World War to avoid Ada Senrigan? Or did Sasuke tell him all about the horrors of the 4th Great Shinobi World War? Well, the possibility of Boruto training with Kashin Koji during the time skip introduced a very clear and obvious third option to how Boruto learned about the Ten Tails. And that's that Kashin Koji, who lived at Kara Hideout with the juvenile Ten Tails, told them all about it. So yeah, from a plot, narrative, and logical perspective, Naruto training for the last 2 years of the time skip with Kashin Koji just makes sense to me. And that only leaves us with one last question to ask. Did Kashin Koji train Boruto in Toad Sage mode? Well, there's no evidence to point in either direction outside of the fact that the Rasengan Uzuhiko uses the chakra of the planet. I believe that if we're bringing Kashin Koji into the story to draw a parallel between Naruto and Boruto's journey, then keep drawing parallels. One could absolutely argue that Boruto doesn't need Toad Sage mode, and that would be like putting a hat on a hat, because there's already enough parallels between Boruto and Naruto. Naruto had Kurama, Boruto has Momoshiki, Naruto had KCM 1 and 2, Boruto has his Karma mode, Naruto got Sage of 6 Pass Chakra, Boruto has the Jogan. But I genuinely wouldn't be surprised that if in the 2 years that Boruto spent with Kashin Koji, he figured out at least a little bit of Toad Sage mode. But what do you guys think? How do you think Boruto ended up with 2 toads in his jacket? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I'm sorry, I get that Code was going through the worst case of spins anybody has ever had, but how don't you feel a toad in your pocket?